Hi everyone, welcome to our first episode of Animator Breaks Down. For our first episode, we're going to be looking at a personal project done by animator David MacKenzie, and he's currently a studio development animator at IOM Media Ventures. So I'm going to put some links in the description just here, and feel free to go and check him out and give him some support because he's done some amazing work here. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the shot first, and he literally just dropped this yesterday, so it's really cool. It's hot off the press, and it's already doing super well. I shared it on Twitter. It's already getting retweeted by like Spider-Verse directors and producers and everything, which is awesome. So that shows you just how great this is. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to open this up, and we're going to watch it a couple of times, and then after that we'll go in and break it down. Essentially what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be analysing this as though I was animating it, and I'll say what I think is working really well, maybe some pointers on what I might do as well if I were to change some, tweak some little things, and hopefully we'll learn something. So I'll just press play now, and just so you guys know, this is all done in Sync Sketch. None of this is sponsored, I just want to promote it because it's an awesome website which allows us animators to help give notes and analyze animation ourselves. So this is all done in Sync Sketch. I'm going to hit play now. I love all the music suspense. It's so good. Really nice cinematography. So good. I believe this is all done in Blender as well. So good, right? So as I was saying, I believe a lot of this was rendered in Blender. I don't know if it was animated in Maya. I will have to double check that with David, but I've been having a little chat with him as well, and on LinkedIn, and awesome stuff, man. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to critique this in different stages, and then we'll kind of go in different moments, and then I'll explain exactly what I'm doing. So what I want to do first is I want to look at this from a staging perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slightly make it so I can draw over the top, which is cool. I will be adjusting to some new features in Sync Sketch because they added that all in recently. So I want to make the brush ever so slightly thicker. That's a bit better. Make it in red. Something like this. Cool. So what I'm going to do is, first, what I really like is we're setting the scene, right? We can roughly tell from like the aesthetic and the way this is edited that this is in the Spider-Verse universe, like Miles' universe. And from the head of the shot, we're just punching in slowly. We're starting off here, and then we slowly track in to somewhere like in this kind of framing. And this just kind of helps set the tone, and it still keeps the shot having some momentum. Just slowly zooming in, and it just keeps the scene alive, just so that it gives us enough time to breathe and process what's going to happen next. And then we have the character jump in. Notice how he goes completely in the center of frame. Near enough, he's only ever so slightly more to the right, but it just helped to break it up so it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it gives us, we instantly read the action because it's in the center of frame. It's not coming from a place we don't expect. And then when we cut, again, can you see how when we cut, we have this he leaves frame in like the lower third. So ideally we want to keep things in thirds. So by this I mean, if I were to draw 2 lines centered, ideally we want to be hitting, these are our main focal points. Or if you want to go for that graphic, you can either go directly somewhere in this realm. So you could also hit kind of in these areas too. This is like our general focal points that we want to be aiming for. Depends on your cinematography, of course. And then when we cut, we have enough breathing room to see that the character is going to come in from screen left to right, which is also a thing that I notice a lot in student animation, is things that are sometimes focused or aimed from right to left, which you can use in cinematography, but there's always a right time and a moment for it. And generally, you know, when we read books, we read left to right on the, you know, in the Western side of the world. So that's generally how, at least when you look at most American movies, that's how they like use cinematography. So you can see he swings in here, and again we're kind of hitting that focal point in that top left on that third. We're roughly in that third area. And then he starts to push slightly more right. I think what I would have done, because you see when he lands, he's still kind of in this lower third, which gives us enough room to see him pushing right. But I feel like to lead the action, so this is where I'm already starting to get a bit critical. But generally what we want, when we want to have like a handheld camera and we don't want it to feel too staged, of course this is framing so that we read the gesture, you know, we read the action, but ideally your character should always lead the action. So in here, I would have, this whole time he feels very locked in place, and I feel like I would have kept him moving a little bit more with momentum, so that ideally he would probably be more in this area by the time he's traveling. That way it always feels like he's gaining momentum. Right now he just feels like the camera is always completely locked with him. And that could be a stylistic choice, but I feel like if we want to have some cinematography that kind of feels natural, then we would always want the character to be driving. So in here, as he leads, can you see how he still feels locked in place? Both the character and the camera move at the same time. And what I probably would have done personally is had the character already start to lead so that he goes down to this frame and then the character catches up. So at this point, he would probably be more in this area. And then as he bounces off, you know, he'll probably become somewhere more in this area. You know, so this line, just to get a point of reference, you can see these like little crossings over here will probably be more over there. And then the characters, like the camera rotation, would catch up a little later. So slightly offset from each other in terms of the relationship between the character and the camera. I really like this graphic kind of like composition that we have, and it feels like everything in terms of the lines all kind of point toward Miles, which is really nice. If anything, you could have even had some set dressing in here that had some like slightly more offset props or something to help it feel like everything was pointing slightly more towards Miles here. I love all the little, like, there's some little keep alive on the camera as well, which is really nice. One thing that I'm also going to mention is hookups. So I'm kind of already covered that a little bit earlier, but hookups is essentially what happens between, we want to make it feel natural between each cut. So at the end of one shot, the following shot should feel like it hooks into it very naturally. And this is a good example of that, where we feel like the character starts to push up in the very last frame of this shot, and then as we go into the next one, you can see it's empty and the character moves into frame. It feels like, in terms of him standing, I feel like naturally I probably would have had the character still kind of in this realm just for the hookup. To have it go empty feels a little bit odd to me. I would have already had it kind of still through the movement. So yeah, naturally I would have started him kind of more in that framing, still in this kind of lower third area, and then he moves into the center, like he's ever so slightly off the center here. Then we pan down, and you can see there are visual cues here, where it feels like he's already looking down, I mean, this is an acting choice, but to help guide the character, which is something I spoke about in our posing video, which I will drop a link right here. So what we could do is have the characters, I feel like staging, like this acting choices also come into staging. So here I would probably have had the character maybe slightly looking up more. So he's like, oh, my head. And then there's more of a visual cue where he looks down here, so that it instigates the camera and forces it to look down. Right now it feels like he's always looking down. And you would have thought the camera would move down earlier. So you want to always think about the motive around the camera and that relationship and how we're guiding the audience. So as it comes down here, you can see, again, I maybe would have played around, because right now it feels like we have the composition on the legs and then we have two very particular pieces that are kind of still in line with that. And I think I would have broken that up a little bit. If it were me personally, I probably would have put maybe something here and maybe a brick here, just to help break up that composition, and it feels like everything's kind of guiding that way. And then again, this is a good example where he leads the action and then the camera comes up with it. So this is a nice one where it feels like we're slowly revealing around the character as he's trying to search. Ooh, there's a little flickering thing going on there. Just notice there's like a weird artifact there. We'll ignore that. And then again, I like how it is deliberately composed in a way that drops right behind Miles. That way we have to reveal. So I love this like idea that it's out of focus as it drops and then it comes around to suggest and reveal the character. So that's really nice. Again, if we're looking at our thirds, see how we got both Miles and Lego Spider-Man on those thirds, which is nice. And it's not too flat either, like it's composed in a way that's slightly guiding the eye this way. And again, I like this idea that we haven't framed it in a way that he's already on screen left, and so we're expecting something to land behind him, but it's actually composed in a way that we are framed nicely for Miles, and then when something drops behind it, then the camera adjusts the composition. So now we're back on those thirds again. So that's a very nice way of playing with cinematography. And again, see how it cuts? We start to leave frame here, and that drives the camera to cut so that we stay with the action. And now we're again kind of on the thirds and everything's starting to enter frame, so that nothing's too symmetrical. We don't have these three lines here, but instead we have two characters favoring, so that we see that these two are against this guy. And again, we're following the action. It does feel like the camera kind of follows again. It feels a bit too early, the camera move for me. I would have had that delayed slightly just so that we guide the audience a little bit more. Like the character leads the action. This is really nice. I've got so much to break down here. It's going to be a big one. So see how... What I probably would have done here as well is I don't really feel too much of the impact on Doc Ock here, so I maybe would have had him push frame slightly, and that would have given us more reason. Because right now, I know he's going to land behind Miles, and there's not much room here, so we could just pan it out, and that would adjust. But if we want to make it more dynamic, he's had the camera come around so that we now have a clearer composition and makes it feel more dynamic. If anything, I think we could have even dropped the camera lower so that we had a bit more forced perspective. So again, following back to what I mentioned earlier in our ultimate guide for posing, if we want to have a bit more foreshortening here, I think we could have pushed this even more. So maybe we'd have had, if I trace this over a bit, maybe we could have had this leg slightly bigger in frame. You're gonna have to see some very janky drawing from me now. But imagine this was Lego Spidey. He was kind of in here, and he kind of gets slightly shorter. And then I think, trying to think of how I would stage this. Let's erase some of this back. Trying to get my rough idea of what I'm trying to pitch here. So imagine this was Lego Spider-Man here, and that's his leg. That's the back of his foot. And then you had Miles kind of here, and then it gets smaller into the distance, so then you'd see Doc Ock here. But we're playing around with the actual depth would feel much lower to the ground, and you would probably see slightly more of the road kind of getting into a vanishing point. So I would have played around with that focal length a little bit more. So it has like a smaller vanishing point. I think you know what I'm trying to pitch, but maybe my drawing isn't justifying it. But this, again, we do want to make it very clear when it comes around here. I do feel at this point, this gesture gets slightly, this could feel a little clearer. It could be somewhere more here. And again, I think we could have pushed that foreshortening a bit more so that we really read all the little details that we got here. So I think Miles could be slightly more, his head could be slightly more in the center of frame. I think we could really push some of that foreshortening. You see how small his hand is. And then again, Doc Ock would still be in that kind of frame where he is here. This is really cool. I like, but then, so again, this is something I mentioned about contrast. So in our animation, we want to have enough contrast. So if we're slightly more in the left frame, we have more room to move right. And right now, he steps forward, and it's slightly cheated in frame. But I think we could have more contrast if he had more room in this part here to move across screen right, and that made it feel more dynamic. So that when we push here, this is cool. So this composition is really nice. It feels very dynamic. It kind of has this flow kind of going around. Kind of pushes in, which is nice. And you see the composition reads the connection between him throwing what I believe is, yeah, he throws a brick. And you see that connection between the three here. And then again, right now the camera leads up before Spidey does, which makes it feel slightly more like a stage choreography. So if anything, if the camera stayed lower and then Miles punches up and then the camera follows, that would have made it feel a little more natural. But again, this composition is pretty cool. I love how everything kind of feels like it's pointing towards Miles here, which is really nice. And then he swings around, which is very cool. And again, they favored the screen space so that you follow that motion, but we favor the screen space so that it stays in this area for a little longer, so we read the action, and then it swings back round. And now we're pushing kind of around here so that we have this arc so that we read that gesture as well. And you can see his silhouette is nice and clear, so we read that, which is really nice. And he jumps in, pushes up. At this point, this is one thing that maybe jumps for me most in terms of cinematography. But right now, all the action is going on down here. We have so much space over here that's not being used. So I personally, at this point, once we're closer in on the action, I would have punched in a little sharper here, so that we're more in this kind of framing. And then we still get, we're still on the thirds and everything still feels nicely composed. so that we read all of this action, because it kind of gets a little bit lost with all the details in the back here. So I would have put that slightly more out of focus. And then this jump here would have then led to us punching out. So, you know, the framing could be more like here at this point. And then by this point, this is when we hit the framing that we have now. I know this is turning more into like a critique section, but this is just my thoughts. And then we're going to break down all the good bits too. Don't worry, there's loads of great stuff in here. And this is cool. And again, nicely and clear that we're reading the action of Miles. And then this is all really fun. Again, he's playing around with the thirds here. He's kind of jumping between these 4 points. He's kind of crossing between them. See here? And then we're still hitting these thirds, which is nice. This is super dynamic. This is where he's, again, playing more with the scaling. So can you see this foreshortening is awesome. I know I'm kind of touching on a different subject too quite early, but this is really nice. And you can see how the camera starts to tilt now. We're getting this tilting action in the rotate Z, which makes it feel very dynamic. Boom. And you get a nice little slow motion part there. And I like this framing where it's a little bit more profile. My only critique here is, so one thing when we're thinking about our staging is we should also consider the safety gate. And the safety gate is essentially a slightly smaller version of your frame. And it sits just inside. So imagine when you're doing your compositions, this safety gate area is the parts that you don't really want to start putting too much information in, because it starts to leave the frame. And we want to keep our composition centered. So here you can see how a lot of the horizon line and a lot of the foot action and all the contacts is outside of, it's like hitting inside this safety gate area. So personally, I would have brought the camera down slightly lower. That way our composition sits somewhere more here in terms of where the curb line is. And Miles would probably sit slightly more here. And that way it just gives us a little bit more room to breathe, where we have a bit more negative space here for the rest of the composition with the concrete. Yeah, it's awesome. So those are my thoughts on the composition. Overall, really nicely staged. A couple of things I think we could have tweaked to like just make it a little clearer and made it feel a little bit more natural, but overall, really awesome. One thing that David's done really well here is like the choreography play between where your eye should be looking and the beats in which things aren't moving, so that you read the action where it should be happening. So that's one thing that he's done particularly well, because there's 3 people fighting here, but yet you know where to look. So now we're going to look at it from every other aspect of animation. So one thing that he's done very nicely here is, just drop down that shadow a little bit. So it doesn't help that the color, I mean, this is a lighting thing, but it would be nice to read the silhouette a little bit clearer here. But you can see that he started with a slightly bigger silhouette and it gets progressively smaller. You can see he's already stretching the volume of the character here, and it's not completely symmetrical. I mean, the legs feel slightly symmetrical here. I probably would have made one slightly more bent than the other just to break up that symmetry. There you go, and he's done that here. We do kind of lose a little bit of the leg's volume because you can only just about indicate which the back of the leg, like the actual length of the leg. So I would have been inclined to keep it slightly more bent in here, just so that we read at least the lower part of the leg with the calf, and then the thigh as well. But this is really nice. I love this like composition. It kind of feels like it pushes out, so we're changing the volume, so it gets thinner and then progressively begins to get wider. So this is something that I've mentioned before in other streams and everything, but we'll do an actual video on this separately. But essentially how you should treat volume not only in squash and stretch in the body, but also your overall pose, and how you can make something feel like it gains volume from going something small and long and thin to something wide and short. So he's done that very nicely here. Feels very graphic as well. So again, I really love this direction where it feels like everything points down. It literally turns into an arrow. So it feels like it guides the character down. Feels very natural as well, which is very cool. There is a couple of screen space matching things here, which is a little bit of an issue. So what they did on the original Spider-Verse would be that they would, every other frame, if they were working on twos, which is where the pose changes every other frame, so it holds for an extra frame, they would screen space match. So essentially, when that frame doesn't change, instead of the camera continuing to move and the character trailing behind because it doesn't move, they actually stick it so that it stays in the position that it was in the previous frame. So for example here, you can see the head is in this position. It would stay in that position over this frame. And here we're starting to get, it starts to get a little stroby because it doesn't match. So I would have kept that matching, or I would have just made it splined for that particular moment because we need to see that momentum drop. So I probably would have just splined that out. And you can see how for the last frame here, everything sticks. That may be the compression, I don't know. Maybe when it's just translated across in Sync Sketch. Then when we cut, again, a lot of the action happens from the hand, and the biggest thing that we track here is the head. So one thing that we want to think about is when we're tracking a very fast movement, what's the biggest part of the body and how we can use that to keep you tracking the action. So for example, if they had big gloves or big shoes, then you can use that big object as a way of tracking an arc. So that's the thing that we follow when the character's moving at a fast pace. Again here, because he comes in and there's a lot of spacing here. And then he just jumps and there's a very big spacing from here to here. So what I probably would have done is for these first few frames, I would have been inclined to add an extra in between just in there, just so that it cushions that. So it feels a little bit like we read the action, because right now it jumps a little bit. We don't completely track that. I will say, however, this is a very nice pose. You can see how the line of action flows through the body. And there's a nice little breakup of symmetry. I like how the hand is kind of bent away from us there, and it flows through the arm, which is nice. And then there's a little change in here. One thing I will say is I don't quite feel in this impact here, I don't quite feel the momentum of the body going through the web. So here I would probably have exaggerated the drag of the body a little bit more. So let's delete this. I would have probably pushed this line of action a little bit more. So it was like this. You can see the legs trailing behind. And that way, when it gets to this point, you can still feel the drag in the spine. It'd be more like this. And that way, when we get to this point, he would start to swing around. And you would feel that momentum pass through, like his weight would shift. So that you can feel the momentum of all of that swing is now passing through the body instead. Because you can see here, as he lets go, as he swings round, I don't really feel like the momentum of him passing through the web has a continuation. It doesn't feel like it follows through the action on Miles. It kind of sticks. So I would have been inclined here to keep the body momentum going around a bit more. And maybe he starts to push off with his legs, or maybe he uses the strength in his arm to vault his body forward. In this case, you can see he kind of vaults the body. So at this point, if anything, I would have kept the arm here and pushed the body up. So that he hits this point. So you want to feel like there's strength, that he yanks the web. So like he does hit some very appealing shapes in here, which are super nice. Like it's very clear, feels very in character as well, which is something that I also mentioned in my guide. This feels very Miles, but it does lack a bit of physicality. I do like how much he's favouring poses though, which is very in the style of Into the Spider-Verse. And you can see that he's sensing something's wrong here with his little spidey senses. And there's enough time to read that because the rest of the body doesn't move. So again, one thing which is also very good in this is clarity. So what we mean by that is keeping everything clear so that the audience should understand what to look at when. And the way to do this is by, if you stop things moving, sorry, ignore that. If you isolate certain actions and then give that enough time to let the thing that the audience needs to see breathe, then you're doing your job correctly. So you can see here how everything in the body on Miles stays still whilst the spidey sense goes off, and that makes it very clear for us to see. Very nice action. We're leading with the leg here. There is a little bit of a disconnect between the body. I would have maybe had the body come down slightly with the leg, so that way it feels like there's a change in volume. So it feels like we're leading with the hips. You know, there's a little bit of a connection there. And he's got a nice little scrambling. So if we track the arc on the leg, you can see how it's easing out, which is nice. And then there's a little scramble here. So that's going this way, this is going this way. So you're getting reverse opposing actions, which is very nice. This is something that gives a lot of charm and appeal to your animation, is by having things swap around from each other. You don't have to do this with just legs. There are many other ways to do this. I will say that this pose, if you look at the legs onto the next frame, they look very similar to each other in terms of position, but the legs are swapping. So ideally in this, I would have had this pose change a little bit more, and I think you could even exaggerate it. So what I would have done is I probably would have, oh, didn't want that. I probably would have made a bigger spacing on the legs here and a bigger contrast. Maybe it's something like this. So that and then maybe you could have like a smear or some kind of multiple on the leg so that we read the change, and then that's when this leg can come up here. So I would have delayed it slightly just so we read that. Now he has slightly suspended our sense of physics here, because as he scrambles, he kind of does this double jump. He like kind of kicks off mid-air, which doesn't quite make sense. It almost feels like a video game where you can jump out of mid-air out with nothing there, but it is entertaining to watch. So it makes it fun. But yeah, he does kind of kick off of nothing here. This is a super nice pose. So this is something I mentioned about flow and rhythm. So it feels like the arm kind of feeds through here. Like everything kind of feeds through each other nicely, which is really nice. Again, thinking about silhouettes, everything's super clear, nothing stacked on top of each other. And then again, opposing actions, this hand starts to go around this way, and then this leg starts to go this way. Again, still everything's super clear in terms of silhouettes. It starts to get a little stacked on each other here. You can see this arm kind of flows through this line. I would maybe separated those a little bit because it starts to stack a little bit there. And I think in here, I would have maybe played around with the physics a little bit more in his spine and got his head to drag a little bit more. Because his head could still be facing up this way, but I think the spine could have made it feel like the hips were now taking all the weight and the gravity was pulling on him a little bit more. And then we kind of lose the action a little bit here, like we lose that contact, that impact frame. That would have been nice to see, but he kind of rolls straight out of it very quickly. So you can see now how the body now starts to rotate this way, and that's what leads the legs. One thing that I will say is you want to, when you're pushing and stretching the body, you want to have a sense of volume distribute throughout the entire body. And right now it feels like a lot of the stretch happens in the hips. So as this pushes this way, I would actually expect the leg to kick here. Right now it feels like the leg is a bit more passive and it's kind of overlapping the action. So I would have pushed that a little bit more and had the leg kick off. So you get that really big sense of direction going forward. And then maybe had this leg kind of round here. And you see they slightly smearing the head. And now because he's pushed off in, essentially you want to think of it like a slinky. This is how I think of it. I don't have any objects to compare it with. But essentially, I could do it with two objects. So I've got a coffee cup. So imagine we had a slinky. So as we stretch, like we're changing the volume. Now as we lead the action, if we start to lead with this object, which is the lower half of him, we then want the rest to catch up. But we want to make it feel like the volume, there's an offset between, they're not going in a unit together. One leads and then the next thing catches up. And so imagine that as the overall volume of your character. So in here, you can see how this is now started to preserve its volume again, but the head is still stretching. So I would have done similarly with the arms. I would have kept those stretching a little bit more. And then it starts to maintain its volume again. This is pretty cool. It starts to get a little bit confusing with the silhouettes as to what's happening here. It starts to stack on itself a little bit, but he only holds it for a little bit. I would have been inclined. Also, the foot starts to break a little bit here. I'm very critical with these things, just so you guys know. But I'm only doing it to help us learn from. I'm not doing this in any way to criticize David's work, because it is awesome. He's done some amazing stuff here. So you can see how at this point he's dragging both the shins. They're both overlapping the action when everything else is going this way. And I think in here, I would have already started to unfold the leg a little bit more so that we distinguish between the two legs a little bit. They start to stack on each other for a bit too long. So in here, I would have had something maybe more like this. So at this point, this leg is probably more out here, and this leg's probably more like there. Just so it feels like he's a bit more out of control and everything's following through. And this gets pretty crazy. So now he's starting to lead with the hips going down and the head starts to drag. But I feel like we needed to have a bit more volume stretch in the body too to justify the head stretching. And then this frame is where it'd be good, because now we've maintained the volume in the body, and that's when the head's still stretching. And then he's got some crazy stuff going on here. The shadows aren't helping him too much here. This starts to get a bit stacked on each other with the lines. But he's now rolling and it gets pretty crazy. One thing that I do really like about this part is, can you see how the arms stay out throughout this entire movement? And it's very stylized, but I love that choice because, again, it gives us something to read. Now, this isn't necessarily the biggest part of the body to show, but you can see throughout all this rolling, which there's a lot of texture, he's kept the arms out so that we track something as we're going forward. So I love this choice. I think this is really fun. And then this is really nice sense of mechanics here, where now the body has stopped rolling, but the hips keep overshooting, as do the legs. At this point, the legs are still dragging behind. And then there's a slight overshoot and settle. We're settling in the overshoot on the hips now. And then the legs are starting to follow through the action. Again, all those principles of animation that we've been learning. And then there's a nice little offset on the arm, so it doesn't feel like everything's in a unit. It doesn't feel like it's going together, but rather the upper half goes down and then the lower half drags and then it follows through. So you're getting this action, which is very nice. If you look at the legs here, as I frame through, you can see there's a slight there. Can you see there's a change? So from here, now the upper half is going up, but the lower half keeps following through. So you get this nice overlapping and follow through action. You can see how he smears around with the leg. I probably would have made that even bigger there. And then the head overlaps the action, so slightly offset, so that it feels like the legs lead him vaulting himself forward, which is very nice. And a nice big smear there on the head too. And there's some nice little cushion frames as well. I'm just noticing, you can see how the foot, this little detail, the foot keeps on following through the action. It kind of overshoots and then settles back again. And then he leans back. So again, this is a slight overshoot on the body now, and then it settles back in. And then he plants his hands. So you've got little contacts for him to distribute his weight. And then you can see how he shifts his weight to one side with his body so that we have enough room to pick this leg off, which is nice. And then he pushes off. And you can see how the arm drags slightly. The only thing I would critique here is it feels like his body should be maybe slightly leaning more forward here. If you look from a profile view, right now it feels like, trying to draw this, it feels like he's kind of like this, with his hips in the same, again, thinking about balance and weight. So if this is our weight right now from a side view, his foot is the point of contact, and if we draw a line up, it feels like his hips are kind of in a line up the point of balance, and then the head is here, and then the arm is out here, and then the legs kind of here. So it feels like he would push forward and he would fall over right now. So I think what he needs to do is, what I would do is, let's change the color. So what I would have done is I would have had his hips further back and lent him more forward, and that way now up that line with his foot contact, he'd feel like he was more on balance. He feels like he starts to lose balance a little bit here in this pose. And then I like how we follow through the action, so it feels like off camera he's distributing that weight and he's coming back around, which is nice. And then there's a little weight shift and overshoot on the screen right before he settles back to screen left in his weight, which is nice. I find it interesting that he rubs with the palm of his hand. It makes a slightly clean silhouette, but it feels slightly unnatural. I mean, it's an interesting choice, to do that. I think naturally we would like press into our hand, so I probably would have kept a bit more contact maybe with the fingers or something. Just so we get a bit more graphic shape there, and a bit more contrast potentially. Again, it's a creative choice, but I did mention earlier, I think in here he should be gesturing with his head towards where the pain was, so I would have tilted his head slightly more like this, so that he's like, oh, and looking toward it, like he's leaning his head toward it, and then we get a bit more contrast for when he starts to look down here. But overall, I feel like we could have maybe pushed the simple and complex. Again, these are all things that I'm talking about from my posing video. So in here, we have the complex side. I think we could have made that slightly more simple if we had this hand flattened toward us. And that way, that would have kept that the simple, and then this the complex. Having this arm out, I think, brings complexity to one side that I think we don't need. It also helps guide the eye toward the left side. There's a slight asymmetry in the body here. We're slightly favouring towards screen left, which is nice. It's very subtle, but there's enough. I maybe would have pushed that a little bit more, so you had something more like this. Just to push it a little bit more. Again in here, the feet directions feel slightly too symmetrical to me. I maybe would have pushed it more like this. Just so that we have a little bit more asymmetry. One thing that I noticed here, this is something where we should always be animating with the entire body, even if you don't see it in camera. So this is an important one. See how he starts to take his foot off the ground here, but there was no shift in weight with his legs here. So what he should have done is, again, I'm going to do a video covering this when we're talking about weight and how you should shift, is if he needed to take this foot off the ground, he would need to shift his body onto this leg first, otherwise he would fall over. He'd fall over this way. So right now, he already begins to take his foot off the ground, but there was no weight shift. So this leg should have gone slightly more this way as this leg, so that we feel the weight shift. And again, you could have maybe had him slightly more on this, so his root was more here. It overshoots more to the right and then settles into the left. But again, this is nice graphic posing here, and the hands break it up nicely, and nice little finger poses there. He's kind of grouped up the two middle fingers, so he's done this, which is nice. This is what we called, like, this is actually quite famous with Disney. If you look at old Disney movies, they do that hand pose a lot. And you can see he's done it here too. It's a nice way to break up the hands. This feels nice and mechanical, the way it sits down. There's a nice little cushion you can see there. This little down and up. If we look at the spacing, it kind of does this on the root, which is nice. And then he pulls up and you can feel like there's some drag in the arm there as he comes up, which is nice. And again, he's weight shifted onto this leg here because he took this foot off the ground. So this time he did it correctly. Yeah, good work there, David. And then he's settling back in the left. Super nice. And then there's a slight little drag. It's very subtle, but there's just enough follow through on the head there after the rest of the action finishes. And then there's a little take, even just that little sharp take where he looks slightly more up. He's like, is enough for us to read like a realization. It would have been nice if there was a slight more change on the eyes. I didn't know if there was any flexibility in the eyes. Hopefully there is, but I would have had a little bit of a wider eye expression there just for us to read like kind of thing when he starts looking around. Although you could argue that he's trying to do a more stop motion feel. So actually by not having too much change in volume in the eye shape, actually makes it feel more like stop motion. This arm here, these feel quite symmetrical. So I would have played around with maybe, let's change the color again. I would have maybe had the arm more here just to break up that symmetry a little bit. I like how he leads the twist with the chest here because he's still locked on where he's looking. So that's a really nice choice where he drags the head and then the head leads round in the next frame. Again, I feel like this pose could have done, maybe the arm was more like here, and at this point, maybe you could have had the arm kind of already following around. It feels like the arm, his back right arm here this one feels like it drags for maybe a bit too long, starts to feel disconnected. As he's looking around, this is nice. I like how he's getting some asymmetry in the head shape here, which is very nice. A nice little sharp spacing. You can see the spacing on the head. So he starts here, then he eases out, and the next frame he eases in, and then cushions in. So that's a nice little sharp spacing for a head turn. And he's got all these subtle little head turns in here, which are nice too. Notice how, okay, I'm going to delete this frame because we've already seen it and talked about it. I love how when he uses smears on the Lego characters, he doesn't like stretch them. He just actually moves them like they would a normal Lego piece. So he's literally nearly just like decapitated Spider-Man here just for the smear, which is really fun. And you can see we've got a tiny little anticipation where the shoulders come up and the rest of the body leans down and the head tucks in. And then there's a little down arc with the head. And then there's a little overshoot where he reacts. Now he's popping up. You doing? And then you can see his volume changes. So now he's gone thinner again. So he's gone from something slightly wider and then he hits something thinner. Do you see that? And then he turns. Nice that his head leads the action around. I like how there's still some overshoot and there's a little body breakup in the legs here, slightly offset from each other. And so he's still overshooting from the landing earlier. And then he settles up. Even in the Lego way he does. And there's still a little bit of breakup with the legs in terms of their posing. So even with Lego, he's able to make some nice poses, which is awesome. I really liked this pose. I like how you still read the hand kind of following through behind his body. This all feels very nice. He's got a very natural spine going through the body. And there's a little head gesture here. So again, nothing else is moving. There's just a little beat for the head to tilt where he's like, huh? There's like a Miles? You're not from our world. And then he's like, huh? Again, anticipating with the shoulders coming up. Because it's all pantomime, there's no vocals. You need to have these little reactions. And then there's a little shift of body on the weight there. And there's a little beat where we're just making the connection between him. He's like, Lego Spider-Man? That's like the subtext that he's saying. Subtext is also something that we're going to cover. All these videos to come, guys. Stay tuned. It may take me some time, but we'll get there. So this is really nice. I love how he's still using physicality and gravity and weight in different parts of the body for different characters. So you can see how this octopus spine lands first, and then there's a swing around. So the spacing does this, and it comes around this direction. So it feels like he lands on one side of his body, and then the rest carries through. So there's a weight shift there, which makes him feel heavy. Can you see that spacing? So if we follow the spacing around, we'll go from his pelvis. It's pretty heavy, so we get rid of that. And it still hits, gets harder and it hits sharper, and then it catches. Again, another video I want to cover is weight, but essentially his curve does this. It's like a bouncing ball. It eases out and it hits, and then it cushions in at the end, which is very nice. This guy keeps on signing in. Let's get rid of that. And then he settles back up again. It's very nice. I love how Miles, he begins to ease out here on his spacing. You see the head? He eases out. And then just as he gets a glimpse of the character, then he's like, whoa, what was that? And he starts to pull back. If anything, I would have had like a kind of like reaction here, like some smears or something. So in here, you can see that he's pushing off with this weight here. So again, just in this single pose, you can feel like he's pushing off in this direction. As he jumps back, I feel like I would have maybe trailed the leg a little bit more, just to feel like he pushed off. Right now, I didn't really see much of a change in the angle on his leg. And then I like how he's already pushing off here because he's in a very fast action, so that he doesn't have enough time to shift his weight onto this leg. He's already pushing off at this pose. And there's little hang time. So again, he's changing the timing and the rhythm in the pose, where he goes from very fast action here and then hangs for a little bit and lets the legs catch up together and then plants back down. I love this. There's such a he still feels kind of unbalanced for a Lego character. I guess they're quite light, so you can literally kind of put him off balance, but I love how he's trying to make dynamic poses while still making it feel like a rigid Lego character. So yeah, and you see there's still like a little nice line of action in the body here. It's almost like this guy worked on Lego Movie. Like, if he didn't, he definitely should, because this guy knows his Lego animation. So then he pushes off, and you can see that we got this nice arc of direction here. And I love, this is very Miles, where he's like, it's kind of cartoony, but I love how he kind of goes off. Both his feet kind of tiptoe at this point here. And I like how his foot then leads the action, but his weight goes back. So now he's staying on balance. And then you got this big smear where the head stays, like you can see that spacing. The head roughly stays in the same position, but the body makes a bigger space. So again, this is that slinky action. And then he hits with these big smears, which is a very cool little smear lines here. And he hits straight into that pose. And then he's just got some cushioning settles on the actual smear lines themselves. I'm learning a lot here as well. It's pretty awesome. And the little anticipation here where he's bending forward. This is awesome. Bonk. And you can see the spacing on the head has this really nice cartoony hang time feeling here. And then I like how the action of the body follows through the action here on Doc Ock. He swings around. And again, this is really fun. This is kind of cartoony. I feel like this pose is maybe outside of Miles. This personally to me starts to feel a little out of character, but it's a nice appealing pose. I will say that. It kind of feels like, in terms of the attitude, I think this could work for Miles, where he's like, excuse me, like, can I help you? Like, can we pause for one moment? Like, who are you guys? That's how, like, this pose reads to me, where he's like, excuse me. But I feel like the pose itself starts to feel out of style. This is awesome. So we have one frame to ease out here. I'll just put EA, ease out. EA. EO, sorry. So I had a bit of a brain function there. And then he hits straight into these Lego pieces for the smear, which is awesome. and then bonk, goes back into character. And you feel like the head starts to come off of his body and the hair starts to come off, which is awesome. I love this change with Miles as well. This, again, is a really nice pose, nice line of action, slightly separated by the leg. And you got simple and complex. It's very nice. Again, slightly outside of the style of Spider-Verse, I would say, in terms of posing, but for the comedic effect, I think it's really nice. Where he's just like, what's going on, guys? And he follows him, and he's like, okay, I guess this is happening. And then there's a beat where nothing else moves. And Miles then has a take to look at Doc Ock as he's anticipating. Or maybe he kind of settles down. He kind of does this like clench, pincer, like, I'm gonna get you kind of mood. Nice little anticipation from Miles here. He kind of hits into that. I feel like I probably would have led the leg a bit more here so that we have a bit more offset in the body. And then the rest of the body kind of catches up. The head does feel a bit too isolated for me here. It feels like it's disconnected from the body, so I would have had that turn ever so slightly just to have that connection. And then again, he's playing a foreshortening here, so you can see how this hand gets bigger. Would have been nice if there was a bit more thickness to the forearm getting thinner, but I mean, there's certain certain rig limitations. This is cool, how it twists. And then it grips, bonk. So it holds big and then goes doosh. And you got the impact shapes here. We've already mentioned the pose, very nice. And then again, super clear directionality in the pose. I think in here, if you look at the spacing from here to here, I think here the hips would have been slightly more this way. That knee would have been more here. So the hips kind of follow through the action a little bit more. And the knees stay connected. Right now it feels like that knee kind of fell, like this feels a bit out of place, that screen right knee. And then he pushes, this is nice. I like how there's still some anatomy involved. It doesn't hit too early into the straight line. And then this is where it starts to hit slightly more into that graphic shape, which is very cool. And he swings. You've got that big, nice straight line going through. I'd have had this foot actually kind of follow through that leg a bit more. So it's more like this. I really like how you can track the arc going around the hand here, so that this is the action that we need to read. And there's nice foreshortening in there. Some nice multiples on the legs. Pretty crazy in here. Maybe one too many for this moment. I would have probably kept it on 2 multiples. There's a lot of multiples in there. It makes it crazier, and it's very fast, so maybe it works. Maybe it's just a preference. Here, I would have already had the hand already hit into impact. So then get a bit more twist in the chest, so it feels like we reach up. You see how my chest twists as I reach up? And the head would already be like up here somewhere, so you'd already knocked it off. And then the rest of the body follows through. I feel like here we're losing some of that volume throughout the body. So I would have made sure that the rest of the body completely stretches and then it kind of settles in. This arm feels a little bit isolated right now. But the pose is nice. Very clean silhouette, follows through the body. So this is very cool. I like this. I like how there's a little hang time on the glasses and the hair there. Oh, it's just the hair. And then a slight... One thing I would have liked to see is, can you see if I track the arc on the hips as it comes around? So we're getting this direction on the hips as he holds. In here, I think we could have pushed this more, this pose. Maybe get the body bending a little bit more forward. So you get something more like this. So it really feels like he's reaching. He kind of hangs for a bit. He does have like, the body is following through, but it kind of hangs for a bit too long. I would have probably kept the body slightly more traveling as well this way. So you get a bit of like follow through. And then it swings around. This is cool. I like how we get this swooping action here with the leg. It feels like it goes round this way. So we track the leg leading, which is very nice. And it creates this big line shape. I did this also in my personal piece of Spider-Man. Very cool. And then we get a continuation, like the rest of the body follows through that curve. So we get this nice swooping action. And then he hits around. I particularly like this with this hand and how it kind of swoops in. This is very nice. And he has this like free falling effect here where the rest of the body he kind of holds in that pose and lets his body kind of guide around. And then he sticks back in. Very stylized, but it works nicely. Very Spider-Man pose here, which is cool. Pushes off, instantly impact. One thing that I see a lot in student animation is they ease out. They have all this anticipation and then they ease out for too long when they push off. And ideally when you push off, it should be a big impact and then it cushions in like this, like David is doing here. And it cushions and gives us enough time to breathe and read this pose. And then I'm guessing, ooh, that's a big step. He holds in here and then there's no smear. He literally just hits into this. If you were going down the style of it smearing, I would have probably smeared the body a little bit in here. Or even had one frame, let's delete this, had one frame where there was a bit more contact with the arms stretched and the head. And then we feel the weights come down. Right now it just feels like he sticks into the weight, so it feels very weightless. There you go. Just for one frame. I like how there's a little overshoot on the body as he settles here on the legs. In this area, this kind of settles in, and then he hits the weight of the character. Then he pushes off. This is a cool pose. Still getting that line of action and the anticipation in the arms. And then boof, impact. Very cool. So we feel that energy. And then everything continues round. I love how he kind of dismantles here. Super fun. And then he lands here. Makes it very clear. He does kind of almost replicate the silhouette of Dr. Octopus, which makes it slightly hard to read. There's some nice little scrambling. You see the leg there kind of slips. Very small detail, which is very nice. You still read Miles throughout this entire piece though. I love how he's holding on to the tentacle here. And then there's a little anticipation here. I probably would have made that claw anticipate a bit more, so that we read it attack. And then some crazy stuff here. Whilst this is very cool with the multiples, I feel like the amount of space he moves, it settles in for a lot with these smear cushion frames. So I would have, if I were to do it, I would literally had this for one frame only. And then it hits out of it, and I would have got rid of these smear lines. And I would have had him, the spacing from here to here, feels like it cushions too much on the body. So here I would have actually had the body more like here. and just snap into that pose a bit more. And then he starts to fall down. I probably would have had a bit more of a C shape this way with the body. And then that hits. Or you can get that contrast more. I guess he wanted to get a bit more contrast. He was trying to, if anything, he could have done this more. If you want to get that contrast so that it's C and then hits. Oh, he grabs him. So in here, I think the body would have followed through a bit more so that we really feel that impact. And again here, the body would have probably overshot and followed through the action slightly. I think the body feels a little bit rigid in there, personally. I'd have had it curl up on itself a bit more. And when he throws him, we've got some nice smears as he wraps around. We're going to get there, guys. See how, if we track the action, I like how there's a cushion frame here where we cushion for, like, we hold in this area for a little bit. I just put H for hold. We hold for one frame and then boom, and then it snaps into this. And I really like this pose. This is super cool. And then we read all these nice multiples and smears. This is super successful. I feel like I wish we'd seen a bit more of a break on the leg there, just so we read the knee. It kind of gets lost behind and makes the silhouette slightly harder to read. But again, these multiples are super nice. Nice little overlaps on the arms where he's wrapping the wrist around. And a very natural fall here. The way it rotates together. It doesn't feel like something... It feels like he's letting gravity follow through him right now. It doesn't feel like he's trying to control it. I guess if you wanted, he would... I mean, he rolls out of it, so it feels like he would control it. So if anything, if we want to make him feel like he has control, I feel like we would lead with the body here and the hand. So the upper half would start to lead the action in here, so it'd be slightly more down this way, so that it feels like he's starting to control gravity rather than it letting follow him. Again, all this dismantled stuff as he also throws the other Spider-Man, which is cool. And then he goes to catch him. Got a little reaction here, he's like, and he gets to catch straight in this very pose-to-pose moment. Slight little ease out here. Ease out. Reach. Got this nice C curve going through the body. Still locking towards the character. Overshoots. I like the weight here, so he reaches, hangs, and then starts to come down and catches. And then he slightly overshoots. I feel like in here, I probably would have had the leg reach over more, so that he's about to catch his leg. Like he wants to catch his weight a bit more here. And then I would have had the body maybe slightly follow through a bit more. I mean, it's tricky because you want it to read the action. I feel like it gets a little weightless. So here, this frame's fine. Just for that one frame there, I would have had it so if the body slightly overlaps a little bit more. And there's a little change in the spine there. The weight does kind of lose. We lose a bit of weight there, so I would have had it go down a bit more on the root. So the root follows through the action. Because you can see in here, this feels like a one-to-one relationship. If I look at here, could you feel it feels like there's no change in weight. It all kind of feels like it happens from one spot. So it feels like there's a pivot in the middle of his body. So ideally, it should feel like it comes from the roots coming down as it changes. And then it'll come up. So always track from the roots first and then work your way outwards. We'll do a video on that too. And then I like this, oof, big stretch. in here where he catches the rest, and then there's a nice little settle. You could have had it maybe just continue a little bit in that arc with the body, with the mass here. Then the catch, very nice. I like this S going through the body, and then he catches with his foot again, all super nice. He is off balance here technically. If you want him to be on balance, his leg would have to be here, so that the line is distributed up this way. Right now the line is here, so he would technically fall over. But for the sake of caricature, I guess he can get away with it. This is a cool S. It's kind of broken. See the relationship between the twist on his body right now? Feels a bit pushed. I think he should have maybe maintained a bit more volume in the chest, so it would have been facing a bit more this way. And you can do a lot with still the shoulders and stuff, reaching around. And then yeah, nice little overshoot on the weight here. And then a whoop, nice little arc. He's doing a big anticipation with the hands that this can swing around this way. And then he pops him down. And I love this little thing here where he comes back and then he's like, okay, you're good? Cool. And then he comes back and then he's like, now where's Doc Ock? And he's like, oh wait, there's like a double take in here. Can you see how the second time as he pulls away, he doesn't go straight back. He doesn't go A, so this is pose A, then it goes to pose B. He doesn't go back to A again. Here, this pose here is pose C. So he breaks it up. So we no longer have the same A. And then he double takes and there's a little exclamation mark. Oh, what? Your head's on wrong. And I love this nice little reach around with the little hands where he's like this on top. It's very nice. Gets a nice little line of action going through the body. It kind of flows nicely. Slight, if I'm going to be picky, there's a slight disconnect in the shoulder. The shoulder should be slightly higher here. So we get a bit more of a straight line there, going through the body. And then I like this pose. I think we could have pushed that arm slightly more. So we get something like that. I've just broken those poses up on the arms a bit more so we get more break. They felt a little bit too straight. But otherwise I like this wide stance. I'll just push those angles a little bit more. And I like the double wiggle on Lego Spider-Man's head where he's like, whoa, kind of thing. Where he's like, oh, that was weird. This is awesome. This is one of my favorite parts of the shot, actually. So he wraps around and he has a big curl. It scales up on the hand, it gets thicker, and it curls in on itself, and then boom, hits into the small. I love that. So he goes like, whoop. It's really cool. And then he track here, swings around. This is, again, love this whole segment of the shot. It's it's like my favorite part. Swings around, love how big this gets. We've already mentioned that. And then he swings around this way. Look at all these multiples in here. So awesome. So we still got something to track because there's a big spacing as it wraps around. See from here, we still need the extra information. So he's added that extra multiple in there on the foot. And then you got some multiples in here. This one's slightly misleading. I would have probably just made it one foot, not the entire leg. But then, yeah, loads of multiples in here. I feel like we need to do a study on multiples. I feel like it was done very successfully on Luca. There's one shot in particular, which I'm sure you guys will know if you've seen the movie. There's one particular shot of Alberto and his legs, and he scrambles off the edge of a cliff. And I was studying the multiples and how they executed it on there, and I feel like studying it actually made sense how those multiples work. So we'll do a breakdown on that. I feel like some of the multiples in here don't quite read for me the same way. So yeah, we'll do a little thing on that. Here's a cool little reference to a shot in Spider-Verse with Gwen where she kicks Scorpion, and there's a little slow-mo where she kicks and it goes bwah, and she kicks him off that way. And there's like a nice 5 frames of cushion here. That's not a 5, that's an F. 5 frames of cushion there. Poof. And then impact. And you got this big anime-like impact where the leg leads the action. And you got this nice little where the leg hits into pose and the rest of the body follows through that action. So that's very nice. And again, he starts to lead down with this foot now. Same foot. Nice straight line of action going through. And then dook. And there's a nice little light bounce, impact, push off. And settle. I like all these little cushion parts in here. I love all this explosion of the Lego. It's crazy the amount of work you put in. Oof. Man, that must have taken so much time. I love all the little bounces off. I wonder if he did like... I'm going to ask him about this. If he did, with all these little pieces, if he animated them by hand. He probably did. Or is it like a simulation? There's a lot of pieces to track, but you could do it. I love the way he animated Lego Spider-Man through this section as well, where he feels slightly more like rigid, and it feels like an actual person. If a person was to animate, like have a Lego person, and they were to move that, that's kind of how it naturally would feel. Like they kind of doesn't make full contact with the ground. He kind of slides slightly in here. And then there's a little twist in there, a little adjustment on the legs, where it feels like there's still pressure put down that leg. Yeah, it's awesome. And he's just like, huh? I don't understand. What's going on? How do you do that? So yeah, that's the entire shot, guys. Quite a long video again, I know, but it's a very long piece. You know, we just broke down a good 1,600 frames, which is a lot to go through. And it's a lot of work for David, so please give him all the appreciation. And again, I'll drop it again. We've got all the details right now of David, and give him some love, share his work. I really appreciate if you guys like this video. I want to do loads of these breakdowns, and we're all learning from it, including myself. And so, yeah, I hope that you really enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to this video. I really appreciate it if you've made it this far. This is a self-funded project and takes up most of my evenings, but I do want to give back to you guys. Anything you're willing to donate would be highly appreciated. So thank you guys, I hope you all learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.